Greetings, guys. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Monette, and this is my channel, Evolve with Monette. We are here on a late night with a little information that I hope is going to get you right. I was asked to do the 48 Laws of Power by my angels, and I wanted to convey this to you. So, we're going to be taking a look through one of the 48 Laws of Power, in fact, number 42. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. Now, pardon me, guys. One of the things that I heard about this is that as empaths, we often have an idea and a premonition about how someone is, their personality, or we can scan a group and see that something may be off with somebody actually, that they may be behaving badly, that they may not be in good spirits, that they may not be that they could be a disruption to the group, that they could be very much a rotten apple. And I haven't, while I have perused, right, certainly what this is, I did not read it in depth because I wanted to teach it with you and kind of walk through it so you can see the epiphanies happening for me. Some of these laws I am very familiar with as I've used them in my life daily. Some of these laws that I read through I wouldn't use, or I would think they're very manipulative, but I think that the reason that my angels asked me to go through this series throughout this year, they said to scatter it throughout the year as we tell you to, because it's going to be applicable to someone out there like you watching right now. And you may need to know this. So you may be in some interesting group dynamics where there is dissension in the ranks, and you may need to strike the shepherd so that the sheep will scatter. The sheep would be indicative of people that are mindless and just follow and that don't really listen to their own intuition. And so I wonder what the message is here for you. Let's learn together and evolve together as we do. This book is written by Robert Greene, The 48 Laws of Power. I'll be reading out of it here. Okay. The judgment here is trouble can often, I'm going to bring my handy dandy candle closer. Judgment can often be traced to a single strong individual. The stirrer, the arrogant underling, the prisoner of goodwill. If you allow such people if you allow such people room to operate, others will succumb to their influence. Do not wait for troubles, as they will cause to multiply. Do not try to negotiate with them. They are irredeemable. Neutralize their influence by isolating or banishing them. Strike at the source of trouble, and the sheep will scatter. So, as an empath, you may not feel that empowered to strike at the source of trouble. But I know that a lot of us have spoken up when we've seen things, and a lot of us have spoken truth to power, and a lot of us have called friendship dynamics in groups on the carpet, or said, like, this family member is toxic, or whatever you've done. So I know that you guys have gotten into that. But as I find that we evolve and develop as empaths, we get more strength in our back and our backbone. The stingray comes to mind as the animal totem, which is all about taking your power back and standing up for yourself. And sometimes standing up for yourself might be standing up for the collective in front of you. Now, sometimes some of us have done that, and it has been not a great outcome for us, in that it feels like we were the ones ostracized by pointing out that someone was not handling something right. So let's watch this law in action and maybe learn something together about how to execute that right, or in a more effective manner. Okay? So, in observance of the law, let's read together. Near the end of the 6th century BC, the city-state of Athens overthrew a series of petty tyrants who had dominated its politics for decades. It established instead a democracy that was to last over a century, a democracy that became the source of its power and its prudent achievement. But as the democracy evolved, we love it, so did the problem of the Athenians that they had never faced. How to deal with those who did not concern themselves with the cohesion of the small city surrounded by enemies, who did not work for its greater glory, but thought only of themselves and their own ambitions and petty intrigues. The Athenians understood that these people, if left alone, would sow dissension. divide the city into factions, and stir up anxieties, all of which could lead to ruin of their democracy. Violent punishment no longer suited the new civilized order that the Athens had created. Instead, the citizens found another, more satisfying and less brutal way to deal with the chronically selfish. Oh, isn't that interesting? How many amongst us have dealt with chronically selfish people? Every year, they would gather in the marketplace and write on a piece of earthenware an askraton, the name of an individual they wanted to see banished from the city for 10 years, or an ostrakon. If a particular name appeared on the 6,000 ballots, pardon me, guys, that person would instantly be exiled. If no one received 6,000 votes, the one person with the most ostraka recording his name would suffer a 10-year ostracism. This ritual, let's just making sure, this ritual expulsion became kind of a festival. What a joy to be able to banish those irritating, anxiety-inducing individuals who wanted to rise above the group they should have served. In 490 BC, Astrides, one of the great generals of the Athenian history, helped defeat the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. Meanwhile, off the battlefield, his fairness as a judge had earned him a nickname, the Just. But as the years went by, the Athenians came to dislike him. He made such a show of his righteousness, and this is believed, and this they believe disguised his feelings of superiority and scorn for the common folk. I'm going to segue here. One of the 48 laws of power is to never appear too perfect, and that is one I am definitely going to teach you, because empaths, it is a folly that we often succumb to. People think that our lives are perfect, and it's something that I have really tried to dispel on my channel here, where I bring you into my life and show you that it's not so perfect regarding some of the things that have happened and some of the mistakes I've made and some of the bad choices and where I could have gone left instead of right or right instead of left. That is something where people will punish you, because when people perceive you to be too perfect, it will create envy, and they will think you to be superior to them and having some kind of complex that you really don't. You are rife with just as many insecurities as the next person, but many of you guys have suffered for not adhering to that law. So I will definitely be teaching that law to you. I'm paraphrasing it, but it's essentially never appear to be too perfect. But in any case, he was suffering because he was not adhering to the law. That righteousness that they may have liked at one time made them feel under his thrall and under his superiority complex, which he may or may not have had. But they believed it disguised his feelings of superiority and scorn for common folk. His omnipresence in the Athenian politics became obnoxious. The citizens grew tired of hearing him called the Just. You see, the very moniker and the name that was given to him because he made good, righteous decisions. Interestingly, came back to bite him. We will definitely dive into that other law. I think this will be imperative for some of you guys here. They feared that this was just a type of man, judgmental and haughty, who would eventually stir up fierce divisions among them. In 482 BC, despite Astrides' invaluable expertise, the continuing war with the Persians, they collected the Oskrata and had him banished. So essentially, the whole city voted that he was the person that should be banished, okay? Because everybody got sick of him, so they got to take that vote, which was created with that democracy in mind. After Astrides' ostracism, the great general Themistocles emerged as the city's premier leader. But his many honors and victories went to his head, and he too became arrogant and overbearing, constantly reminding the Athenians of his triumph in battle, the temples he had built, the dangers he had fended off. He seemed to be saying that without him, the city could come to ruin. And so, in 472 BC, Themistocles' name was filled in on the ostraca, and the city was rid of his poisonous presence. More laws are coming to mind here, even as I'm reading that. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, not one of the 48 laws of power. It's something to understand. The power will go to your head. You have to check yourself. And to whom much is given, much is expected. And a lot of the empaths watching here, whether you are in any position of power, but you have been in your life and your career, no matter where you are right now, whether you are actively working now, you're in a twilight, you're retired, whether you're just beginning your workforce history and whatever, you have been in places where people have seen you as just and seen you as fair and seen you as someone that's they could go to and trust and listen and hear. But you will be tested. Everyone is tested, and so you'll be given a lot of acclaim. One of the things that I remembered was to not believe the hype, the fame, or the acclaim, because the same tongues that will bless you will be the same ones that will curse you. So in reading reviews and things like that, as I freelance for psychic companies, I would do it quarterly to ascertain whatever constructive criticism I could, but I didn't let all of the 5-star ratings go to my head. I used it as a talking point. I used it as a bargaining point. I was businessly, I used business acumen to utilize how to make that go forward and be advantageous for me. But it wasn't something that I took in, because those same praises could end up to be a star of 1, 2, or 3, or those same people that liked me one day could not like me the next day if I was very honest with them about what was happening in the reading. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Never believe the hype. So we see that with a lot of our celebrities today that get very invested in what the people have to say, because we are in a democracy, in this country specifically. And while this is not political, we are in a democracy. Think of Twitter. Everybody's voting with their words. What do they say? You're guilty by a jury of your peers, yes? So I want you to understand that that may be something that you have come up against and not even realize it, that people will challenge you, and you'll be given opportunities to have a lot of power, and you have to be very, very careful with how you allow that to go to your head, because you will not ascend. Oh, throat chakra hit. We're going to get the message out today. You will not ascend to greater levels of heights if you can be corrupted. Because here's the thing. They say pride cometh before the fall. When you get to a place where you think that you are it and you are all, you will be absolutely tested, and there will be a fall. Never forget that. All right, guys. Back to the story at hand. So they were rid of his poisonous presence. The greatest political figure in the 5th century Athens was undoubtedly Pericles. Although several times threatened with ostracism, he avoided the fate by maintaining close ties with the people. Perhaps he had learned a lesson from his favorite tutor, the incomparable Damon, who excelled above other Athenians in his intelligence, his musical skills, and his rhetorical abilities. It was Damon who had trained Pericles in the arts of ruling, but he too had suffered ostracism for his superior airs, and his insulting manner towards the commoners stirred up too much resentment. Toward the end of the century, there lived a man named Hyperbolus. Hyperbolic. Interesting. That seems like it might be a derivative of that word. Most writers of the time describe him as the city's most worthless citizen. He did not care what anybody thought of him, and slandered whomever he disliked. He amused some, but irritated many more. In 1417 BC, Hyperbolus saw an opportunity to stir up anger against 2 leading politicians at the time. He hoped that one of the 2 of these guys would be ostracized, and that he would rise in the man's place. His campaign seemed likely to succeed. Athenians disliked one of the politicians' flamboyant and carefree lifestyle, and were wary of the other's wealth and aloofness. They seemed certain to ostracize one or the other, but one of them, although they were otherwise enemies, pooled their resources, but both of the 2 that he was trying to get ostracized pooled their resources and managed to turn the ostracism onto Hyperbolus instead. His obnoxiousness, they argued, could only be terminated by banishment. Earlier sufferers of ostracism had been formidable, powerful men. Hyperbolus, however, was a low buffoon. And with his banishment, the Athenians felt that ostracism had been degraded, so they ended the practice for nearly 100 years that had been one of the keys of keeping peace within Athens. Let's talk about the interpretation. The ancient Athenians had social instincts unknown today. The passage of centuries has blunted them. Citizens in true sense of the word, citizens in the true sense of the word, the Athenians sensed the dangers posed by asocial behavior, and saw how such behavior often disguises itself in other forms. The holier-than-thou attitude that silently seeks to impose its standards on others, overweening ambition at the expense of the common good, the flaunting superiority, the quiet scheming, Terminal obnoxiousness. Some of these behaviors would eat away at the city's cohesion by creating factions and sowing dissension. Others would ruin the democratic spirit by making the common citizen feel inferior and envious. The Athenians did not try to re-educate people who acted this way, or to absorb them somehow into the group, or to impose a violent punishment that would only create other problems. The solution was quick and effective. Get rid of them. Within any group, trouble can most often be traced to a single source: the unhappy, chronically dissatisfied one who will always stir up dissension and infect the group with his or her ill ease. Before you know what has hit you, the dissatisfaction spreads like a disease. Act before it becomes impossible to disentangle one strand of misery from another, or to see how the whole thing started. First, recognize troublemakers by making their overbearing presence, or by their complaining nature. Once you spot them, do not try to reform them or appease them. This will only make things worse. Do not attack them, whether directly or indirectly, for they are poisonous in nature and will work underground to destroy you. Do as Athenians did. Banish them before it's too late. Separate them from the group before they become the eye of the whirlpool. Do not give them time to stir up the anxieties and sow discontent. Do not give them room to move. Let one person suffer so that the rest can live in peace. When the tree falls, the monkey scatters. A Chinese saying. Let's talk about this a little bit regarding how this dynamic may have worked in interpersonal relationships. A lot of empaths get heads up that someone is corrupt, whether it's in the workplace, a friendship group, maybe between you and a bestie, maybe a new relationship dynamic. We get heads up that something is off, that someone does not have the best nature. Some of us have done the thing, which is to directly attack the person. When I say directly attack, we may not have gone into an all-out warfare, but we try to tell someone, hey, this person's not good. And as I was reading through, I was seeing how things went left. When you try to bring that attention, maybe just to one person, now you are persona non grata, and they're going to do what these other two did, which is banish this lowly buffoon, because he was strategizing to take one of their places. And it kind of weakened the whole system, because they were like, well, he was obnoxious, but he wasn't that terrible. This is not what we designed it to be. The reason that I say this is because when we go directly to the source, sometimes they will then start a campaign against you. So you have to be really careful. Now, how would this look? How would this work if you can't banish someone, because we're not doing the ostracism system? If you can't do that, you could just remove your energy. So that's something that I definitely have practiced. When I realize that someone is lowly or they're a troublemaker. So I often say beneath us. Yes, empath, I do. But that is not because it's from a haughty place. It's about a place of understanding your energy and how precious it is to you. It's about stopping you from dealing with the omnipresent autoimmune issues that we empaths succumb to after a lifetime of trying to put out fires for people that are troublemakers, and we knew right away. In my life, I remember seeing a situation where I identified someone as a troublemaker. It's happened several times. It's happened so many times. It's kind of a hazard of my job. But it happens, and what happened is people got very mad at me because I was right. That's it. And people don't like that. But then I was definitely attacked, because instead of just removing my energy right away, then the empire could strike back, meaning they could now coalesce and be like, no, you're the problem, it's you. So what I've learned to do is just remove my energy. And so when people would want me to intermingle with their troublemaker friends or people that I considered quite miserable, I think that this was just such an accurate description. It can be traced to a single source: the unhappy, chronically dissatisfied one who will always stir up dissension and infect the group with his or her ill ease. This goes to another law of power, avoid the unlucky and infected. And so there's always one person. And in this case, I can think about several years ago seeing someone and knowing that they were corrupted. I never even met them to their face. I just heard about their energy. I heard stories about them. I read their energy, and I was like, this person is miserable. And I didn't understand why anybody I was friends with would want to be friends with them, but I wasn't playing high school games because, sometimes people feel very much like, well, unless they do it to me, I don't know. But here's the thing: if they're doing it to other people, they're going to do it to you too. It is a part of their human nature, and it's a thing we will all do. We all have things that are ingrained, but that's not just an idiosyncrasy. That's a terminal cancer and pain. And so when you see people are chronically dissatisfied, always complaining, always have like a negative word to say, not just like trying to figure out a problem or problem solve with their friends or bounce something off the wall. That's definitely a way that I process, so I can relate to that. Not to excuse it, but I relate to that. But it's not about being chronically dissatisfied. And so there are people that are chronically dissatisfied, that are just never ever happy with anything, that can't say like, I had a really good day, or I'm grateful, or something wonderful happened today, or I'm living in magic, or whatever, right? There are people that are absolutely always looking. You guys have worked with them. You've seen them at your job. So you can remove your energy. Don't necessarily point it out. That's one way that you can manage and handle that. It's something that we are going to be called to do, because it is it's a strategy to protect you. But if you can see it, and here's what I do energetically, because they go into all these machinations and there's all these other observances of this law. What I do now, when I notice that there's a poison apple and a poison root, is I metaphysically, spiritually identify it. I don't do anything. I don't light any candles. I don't do any work. But I identify that this is going to be the undoing of you, whomever the you is that I'm warning, right? And I don't necessarily say it anymore. I just observe it. And I just remove myself, and I walk out of the door. I vote with my feet. Because then that person can't attack you. They will then cannibalize each other, just like those other two did. Does that make sense? They will cannibalize each other, because the thing about it is a person that's chronically dissatisfied wants that misery. They want everyone else to be unhappy like them. And if you have happiness in your life and you like who you are, that person isn't going to want you to stay in the fold with the other sheep. They want you to be far, far away. So you strike when you notice that they have something to say. And when I say strike, like I said, that can sometimes backfire, but I want to help you to understand that it is okay for you to call it. Yeah. Have you ever just called something just in your head, maybe yourself, and know like, this is not going to go good? Call it and understand that. But be relentless. When I identified that that person was toxic, I was relentless in my avoidance of their energy. And when my friend was like, this person wants to meet you, who the hell are they to want to meet me? Who the hell am I for them to want to meet me? What does this mean? It means nothing to me. I could tell we were not equally yoked. I could tell that they were steeped in infection and misery, and I could tell that they were going to be the undoing, unfortunately, to my friend, which they were. She lost everything, but she had to be playing out these high school dynamics because she hadn't healed. And I was like, this person is not the good deal. This is not the good thing. And so it means that I took a little heat, because I, on the front end, said absolutely not. But on the end of it, I was absolutely right. 1000% right. That person ruined everything that they touched in their life and had a negative effect on everyone, from their kids to their spouses to their co-workers to their lovers. They were a disaster. I didn't read it wrong. And so that's what I want you to do, is not second guess. So if you can't just strike and obliterate that person's energy, you can observe it and then remove, and then just hold steadfast. I wasn't haughty. I wasn't snobby. I just was like, oh no, thank you. I'm good, because I could see that they were dis-ease, and that dis-ease would have been passed on to me. The keys to power here is, in the past, an entire nation would be ruled by a king or a handful of ministers. Only elite had any power to play with. Over centuries, power has gradually become more and more diffused and democratized. This has created, however, a common misconception that groups no longer have centers of power, and that power is spread out and scattered amongst many people. Actually, however, power has changed into a numbers, but it's not an essence. Okay, there may be fewer mighty tyrants commanding power of life and death over millions, but there remain thousands of petty tyrants ruling smaller realms and enforcing their will through direct power games, charisma, and so on. In every group, power is concentrated in the hands of one or two people. For this is one area in which human nature will never change. People will congregate around a single strong personality, like planets orbiting the sun. And so that's a tell for someone that may be toxic. It doesn't mean that every strong personality is toxic, but it does mean that there is a proclivity. Oh, but little message from the angels there. It does mean that there is a proclivity for strong people to lean into toxicity because absolute power corrupts absolutely, what I was saying earlier. So that person that I identified from a distance, never having physically met her and only laid eyes on her in a picture maybe one or two times, she was a strong toxic personality. She had a horrible effect on everybody else around her. When she walked into the office, she was tromping through and she was causing everybody to feel fear, and people were scattering because of her personality and they were running scared, and it was all about her moods. Have you guys ever worked around or been around someone like that? And so when my friend was telling me about the effect she was noticing, but she still was like gravitationally pulled to her in her orbit, as much as she talked crap about her and knew that she wasn't healthy, there was no one that she wanted to be closer to than that Lindsay. She needed it. She needed to be close to that person. She manifested it. It unraveled her life completely, but a strong personality has a certain charisma, yes? And if someone doesn't feel empowered, they will gravitate towards somebody that is low vibrational like that. They may think that they're high vibrational, but they really are just waiting to attack because they are miserable. So she came into the office and affected everybody in the office, but my friend didn't have the wisdom to say, like, I should steer clear of this. For me, I'm running the other way. Even from a distance, I was like, this is not a playground in which you want to play. I promise you, this is not going to end good for you. And I couldn't even predict how disastrously it would have ended. But I knew she was infected. Does that make sense? And some of you guys have identified people that were infected, and I knew that her infection would spread and it would get into the head and minds and energy of everybody around her, because misery loves company. So to labor under the illusion that this kind of power center no longer exists is to make endless mistakes. It's to waste energy and time and to never hit the target. Powerful people never waste time. Outwardly, they may play along with the game, pretending that power is shared among many, but inwardly they keep their eyes on the inevitable few in the group who hold the cards. These are the ones they work on. When troubles arise, they look for an underlying cause. The single strong character who started the stirring and whose isolation or banishment will settle the waters again. This is so interesting to me, because I knew that person, that Lindsay, needed to be banished. I knew that she needed to be banished. And spiritually, there are ways that I could have done it, but I don't override people's free will. And my friend needed a lesson, and she needed to walk through and swallow that very bitter pill. I knew that she needed to be just fully like cut out like a cancer. There's some people you can't negotiate with. There's some people you can't let back in because they are used to operating in the way that they are used to, and they're insidious and they will do it again and again. They are so comfortable in their toxicity and low vibration energy that they'll just start to manipulate you as soon as they think that you can't see. So I have made some really firm boundaries with people in my life that I don't trust. And I don't care if they're family, friend, foe, or next of kin. I don't care who they are. When I identify, and that's been tough for other family members, specifically in family dynamics, because people are like, well, are you going to like move past this? Are you going to talk to that person again? Are you going to, no. Because what the person that is saying that to me doesn't realize is that I'm neutralizing the danger. I know who they are, whether they are family or a stranger. I get it. And so I know that to allow them back in is only to allow them to try to manipulate me again. They can't help themselves. And so I'm just helping them to steer clear and far away from me. I'm doing them a service, actually. But what I do by modeling that firm, resolute, non-wavering after I've assessed it properly is I'm teaching boundaries to those people that are observing me. And that's the place that you guys are in too. You are teaching boundaries to people around you. There may be some things that you have cauterized and cut off, and you may have beat yourself up and thought, why did I do that? You did it because of this rule. You understood that even if you couldn't banish them, you could banish your own self and energy from them, and then they could not try to bring you into whatever their demise is. So, okay, so where we leave off. When troubles arise, they look for an underlying cause, the single strong character who started the stirring and whose isolation or banishment will settle the waters again. In his family therapy practice, Dr. Milton Erickson found that the family dynamic was unsettled and dysfunctional, there was inevitably one person who was the stirrer, the troublemaker. In his sessions, he would symbolically isolate this rotten apple by seating him or her apart from the others, if by only a few feet. Slowly, the other family members would see the physically separate person as the source of their difficulty. Oh my gosh, this is so powerful, guys. Once you recognize who the stirrer is, pointing it out to other people will accomplish a great deal. Understanding who controls the group dynamic is a critical realization. Remember, stirrers thrive by hiding in the group, disguising their actions amongst the reactions of others. Render their actions visible, and they will lose their power to upset. In the situation that I was in that specific friendship dynamic, though there are so many that we could talk about here, I always, even with the cult, I identified the problem. And even if it got my ass reamed, I identified the problem because it needed to be seen. And then what would happen later, and you guys have heard some of my stories, is people will come back to me and be like, oh my God, everything you said. Now, it wasn't because I was so magical or such a great empath or psychic. It's because I am good at reading people's energy, though. So whether people like it or hate it, that is something that I do. And it's broken my heart, guys, so many times too, just like you, I'm sure. But when you say it, so here's what I did. I literally said, hey, this girl's going to cause you to lose everything. You should tread really lightly here. And then I walked out the door. Meaning I observed it and then I receded my energy. You know how there's that meme of like the Simpson receding back into the bush? That's what I did. I receded my energy. But upon my friend having her own wake-ups and epiphanies, she could remember, oh my God, Monette said that this girl was the disease the whole time. So in effect, even though it didn't work the way I wanted it to, where I could offset and stop her from having the trouble come to her, what I did was I alerted her to the fact that this is where the stir resides, and that she's playing all of you guys, all of these girls against each other in all these high school games because she's miserable and she needs this kind of acclaim and clamoring that you all dummies are doing. And so I was like, I'm not taking part of this. She doesn't get to meet me. Okay, it's not because I'm so magical, but it's because she wasn't going to bring me into the deficiencies and the disease. Yeah, so that's how you can do it. If it's not something you can just be like, I banish you. You can't always do that. We're not, Athenians here. But I will say you can verbally identify and isolate, and then isolate yourself, because I promise you it's going to play out exactly. Even in the family dynamic that I'm talking to you about, I identified the toxic patterns of the family member I'm talking about a couple years ago. And it was a really tricky situation. And then I isolated myself and I addressed it with that family member. So that's one thing I do is I take it right to the streets with whomever is who. That's not an issue I have. I have no problem with direct communication or confrontation. However, but that's after years, my sweet empath nation, okay? It takes us a while to build up to that after being trampled and trodden through. But I took it to her directly in an attempt to give her the benefit of the doubt that it was not something that she was meaningfully trying to do or purposely trying to do. And then when I realized that it was in fact something that she was purposely trying to do and that she rather enjoyed it and that it was delightful and delicious for her, I realized, you're not going to snack me. I get it. And I separated from her. And here's what happened. I made my stance, but I said it to her. And I didn't go around and gossip with the rest of the family. But people observed my stance. And then they started to notice how she stirred trouble with everyone else, actually. And that it was always a problem. And then one by one, they would come to me and another neutral family member, a Swiss family member. Not actually Swiss, but a gentleman in my family who is older and is very neutral. So one by one, people know that I'm a counselor, so people would come to me and they would go to him, and we don't share, right? So they would go, meaning they could come to us. We are confidants to each other, but we don't share with the family or make any kind of dispersions. And so one by one, including that family member, my Swiss neutral family member, was like, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this situation. I'm overwhelmed because of this and this. All the things that I had identified. That's how you banish sometimes. Our words are very powerful, empath. I have to be very careful when I'm mad at somebody or frustrated or disappointed that I'm not really banishing them, because I definitely can do that energetically, and so can you. So be very careful with the words you say. So, but what I did was, like, in fairness, I said, if this is true, then let the evidence be seen. And it was. So, but what I did, in effect, was isolated that person just from my energy. And one by one, the rest of the family was like, oh my goodness, this person is a shit stirrer. This person is manipulative. This person's lying to my face. Yes. But I was judged in the early days and guilted, like a lot of us will be from family. Like, you should talk to this person. They're your family. Absolutely not. I've said no to my mother. I've said no to sisters. I've said no to brothers. Absolutely not. If I don't feel like they are really working on their own healing and doing what they need to do. So that's an important way that you can banish someone, and people will pay attention and think about you later. Even if they tell you you're crazy in the moment, later they'll reflect and be like, oh, you did say that that was something they would do. Or you did remove yourself and you wouldn't even engage, and now they're doing all these crazy things. Now they want to turn the page. So the other families would see and physically separate. Once you recognize the stirrer, pointing it out to other people will accomplish a great deal. Understanding who controls the group dynamic is critical to realization. Remember, stirrers thrive by hiding, yes. A key element in games of strategy is isolating the enemy's power. In chess, you try to corner the king. In the Chinese game of Go, you try to isolate the enemy's forces into small pockets, rendering them immobile and ineffectual. But it is better to isolate your enemies than to destroy them. You seem less brutal. So what I did in that situation was, I knew that she was a shit show. I knew that it was a disaster. I knew, and we could say that for any of these things I'm talking about, from the cult leader to the family member to this friend's friend, right? I knew that they were, there was dissension in the ranks, and that they were the stirrers and the miserable people. And so what I do is I just isolate, because I don't brutally attack. Now they will attack, because when they realize that you don't want anything to do with them, now you're the villain, and they will start to gossip about you. But that slander and gossip will be turned on to others too, and then others will wake up and be like, oh, okay, I see exactly what's happening here. Because then I was persona non grata, and I was enemy number one, specifically with that friend's friend. I was not proximal. We lived many, many miles away, so I couldn't actually isolate her. It all was spiritual warfare. And she was like, how dare you not want to know who I am? Because she'd become quite obsessed with me. That's another thing. Your scarcity creates obsession, unfortunately. Even when you really aren't trying to play any games, that's another law of power. And you can make that work for your favor or out of it. I have had only negative effects when I say that when I remove energy, it makes people wild, wicked. And so she felt away. She felt away, even though we never spoke words. I never had to scold her. She watched this channel. She paid attention and stalked and did all the things that, gang stalkers do. But it wasn't anything in the moment. That happened afterwards. Did she hear my real truths? For years while all that was going on, she didn't have any words from me specifically, unless my friend told her my one warning of, be careful. This one's going to bring you to your knees. And I know she did. And so, the attacks began. But anyway, when you seem less brutal, the result is the same. For in the game of power, isolation spells death. For people that like to stir and like to cause all this dissension in the ranks and feed off of the misery and are miserable themselves, if they have no one to feed off of and create chaos with, they wither and die. And that's what I know. They need a supply. And what's a word we associate with people that need supply? Narcissist. Ding, 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 ding. Are you guys getting it? The most effective form of isolation is to somehow separate your victim from their power base. When Mao Zedong wanted to eliminate an enemy in the ruling elite, he did not confront the person directly. He silently and stealthily worked to isolate the man, divide his allies, and then turn them away from him, shrink his support, and soon the man would vanish on his own. Presence and appearance have a great import in the game of power. To seduce, particularly in the beginning stages, you need to be constantly present or creating a feeling that you are. If you're often out of sight, the charm will wear off. Queen Elizabeth's Prime Minister, Robert Cecil, had two main rivals, the Queen's favorite, Earl of Essex, and her former favorite, Sir Walter Raleigh. he contrived to send them both on a mission against Spain. With them away from the court, he managed to wrap his tentacles around the queen and secure his position as her top advisor and weaken her affection for Raleigh and the Earl. The lesson here is twofold. First, your absence from the court spells danger for you, and you should never leave the scene in a time of turmoil, for your absence can both symbolize and induce a loss of power. Second, and on the other hand, luring your enemies away from the court at a critical moment is a great ploy. Isolation has other strategic uses. When trying to seduce people, it is often wise to isolate them from their usual social context. Let's talk about this. A lot of this stuff, while I might be like, obviously we're not going to utilize this is not who we are, empaths, but it's so important to know that these tactics have been used against you. In narcissistic and abusive partners, Harry and Meghan, isolation from their social source. You guys see how all of this stuff is like really powerfully applicable to everyday life? We notice that abusers will try to take you away from your family and friends, and they will want to isolate you. So that stir that was toxic and infected didn't want my friend to be around anybody that actually cared about her, could speak into her, because she needed her to be a foot soldier in a pawn. She needed the supply that she was giving. She needed whatever they were deriving from each other. So she wanted to make sure that she felt like she did not have me. I wasn't banishing my friend. I was banishing the Lindsay energy, because I knew how toxic she would be to everyone that I cared about and loved. The person's child, that kind of stuff, right? I knew that the breakdown of the friend that I knew would affect the parents, that person, my friend's parents that loved her dearly. I just knew that there would be so many terrible things. It wasn't just about me. I saw, unfortunately, like That's So Raven, the full vision of the carnage that would be as a result of that one Lindsay. So what that one Lindsay did, and what cult leaders do, and what abusive partners do, and what narcissists do, is they say, I have to isolate them from you. So that isolation tactic is used in their arsenal as well too, and that's why it's so important that we know about that, so that you know what's happening and you can clock it and see. So excuse me. Okay, for your absence can both symbolize and induce loss of power. Second, and on the other hand, luring your enemies away from the court at critical moments is a great ploy. Isolation has other strategic uses. When trying to seduce people, it's often wise to isolate them from their usual social context. Once isolated, they are vulnerable to you, which is exactly what my friend became vulnerable to that person, because she was just in her thrall every single day. They are vulnerable to you, and your presence becomes magnified. Similarly, con artists often look for ways to isolate their marks from their normal social milieu, steering them into new environments in which they are no longer comfortable. Here they feel weak and succumb to deception more easily. Isolation then can prove a powerful way of bringing people under your spell to seduce or swindle them. So I knew that my friend was being brainwashed, because she was being very much encouraged to disconnect from our daily check-ins. And while my friend, it's such a powerful lesson. I thought it was about one thing, and now that I'm a teacher and I utilize it on a daily basis regarding other people that are going through things, I realize that our soulmate connection was in fact very real. While I don't romanticize it, or idolize it, I definitely have transmuted it, which is what we do, empath. That person used the isolation to further brainwash my friend, because our check-ins, for a lot of you empaths, you can relate, were a form of cleaning. Think about a dialysis machine. I would cleanse her energy. I would talk to her. She would talk to me. We'd bounce ideas off each other. She would have talked to me about a Lindsay, but she kept it because for her it was delicious, and she was doing some other stuff that we were working out in our soulmate connection of parentifying me, and so the rebellion had to happen and all of that. It was all meant to happen exactly as it was, but had she continued the line of communication with me, what would have happened is I would have intercepted the toxicity of that connection. I wouldn't have brainwashed brainwashed her, done anything. That's not my job. But I would have alerted her in our way that we do empath to the fact that she was dealing with a demonic slob. Like, I would have let her know energetically, like, oh, so what do you think about that? And I would have pushed it back to her. So I was essentially a therapist, which is what I do in my daily life, right? But I was doing that for my bestie at the time. And I would have done that. And so Lindsay knew that. So it was very important for her to get her away from me, because, like, how could you? And so then I needed to become the corrupt person, which is what she did so beautifully and expertly. And with a little bit of her own suspicions and jealousies, meaning my friend, her own energy played into that too. Lindsay was not all that powerful. But what happened was it was just a little bit of a jealousy or weirdness there. All Lindsay had to do was, like, pour a little gasoline on that and light it, you know? And so then it was severed, and I no longer was allowed to advise, meaning my angels said to me, they said, stop telling her anything about this girl. Just let her figure it out. She's in a world of hurt, and she will long for your advice and your wisdom and your kindness someday, but she will never have it. Not from Lindsay or anybody else around her. Now she will be in a den of snakes. That's where she will play. But that's what happened, is that Lindsay was she used this tactic on me, right? I banished her first energetically, and then she was like, I see you and I raise you. And I'm going to make sure that this girl doesn't talk to you, because you're going to tell her that I'm insane demon, you know? And I would have, in my own way. I'm subtle, because sometimes you can't directly say something to someone that's infatuated, and infatuation, I don't know what other word there would have been for that. And so a con artist uses this tactic too. You will often find powerful people who have alienated themselves from the group. Perhaps their power has gone to their heads and they consider themselves superior. Perhaps they have lost the knack for communicating with ordinary folk. Remember, this makes them vulnerable. Powerful though they may be, people like this can be turned to use. So think about politicians that stay in their bubble and they're in an echo chamber. They're only hearing them. They believe everything that they're saying and doing. Think about all of our reproductive rights that are being stripped from us. That has to do a lot with people that are dealing with the absolute power and are not being right. They have no one else speaking in for them. And so it's really important for you to understand that if you are ascending in any leadership position, I'm looking at a book here on my bookshelf, The 4 Acts of Personal Power, by Denise Linn. If you are ascending to any position of leadership and you are growing into that, you need to keep feet and boots on the ground. One of the things, no matter what party affiliation you are with here in the United States, one of the politicians that was a great politician to me was Barack Obama, and he built his platform kind of grassroots. It was, he definitely utilized social media. He did a lot of really cool things before. It was really cool to do those things, but he had his ear to the ground, and he's a Leo. I've looked at his chart, just like Donald Trump has a lot of Leo in his chart as well. So these two were both meant to be kings. I think they both have about 4 to 5 Leos in each of their charts placements. So they were definitely meant to be kings in their life, to a degree, kings, right? And so we see the corrupt version and we see the more honorable version. But what I'm going to tell you is that Barack, even though he can be heady and know that he's the shit, know that he has swag, know that he can dunk a basketball or swoosh a basketball from half court, knows that he has comedic timing, he's funny, he's interesting, all of those lovely things. Like, if you like me, he's a likable person. He knows his charisma. Leo knows their charisma. That's one of their power traits. But what I will tell you is he kept his ear to the ground and he listened. He did not get too heady. He never felt that way. He was very much, and while he could have easily been brought into corruption, I will never forget Steve Bannon, who was a advisor for Donald Trump, actually giving an interview on Fox News, and he was saying, my God, we tried during the election to corrupt Barack. We tried to send him prostitutes. We tried to get him involved in money laundering schemes. Not from, we didn't come up and say, it's a Republican team trying to trick you, but they did it in these like sneaky, insidious ways that he would never know. And he said, one thing I can say about him, he's like, I hate the guy. Now this is a testament, okay? He's talking about the 48 laws of power. if your enemy can say that you have credence and you have integrity, then I don't think there's a better thing that could be said about the. So he said, I hate this guy. This is what he's saying on this Fox News report. But he was like, we could not impugn his integrity. He didn't take the bait ever. And it wasn't like he knew it was from us. He just never did it. He never took the prostitutes. He never took the this. He was incorruptible. He was like, he was not scandalous. He was like a scandalous. It was like we literally couldn't do anything to bring him in. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Barack kind of keeps his feet in the ground, kind of is down to earth in a way, even though he is lofty and high-minded and a politician and can be slick and charismatic and all of the things. So he's no perfect specimen. But when Steve Bannon, your great enemy who went after you and hated you, can say, we tried. There was nothing we could do to make him take the bait. I found that, like, I was like, let me have someone say that about me someday. To that degree, let my integrity shine through that, like, no matter what it is, like, I'm as honest as I can be, right? And there is no duplicity that resides in me. Well, we have duality. Come on, shadow side. Duplicity is another thing. And so I thought that that was really interesting. But the reason that people can get corrupted is if they can get so far above themselves that they don't think they need to talk to everybody. They don't need to connect. We see that even with YouTubers when they get so big. Now, I will tell you, when you get so big, there's only so much energy you have. You cannot answer every single comment, all of that stuff. But the YouTubers that we stay connected to for many years, I know because I have parasocial relationships with some of my favorite YouTubers, are people that seem to not be out of touch. And each one of us has watched when we've seen someone ascend to the heights when they are now out of touch. And you're like, what happened to them? They used to be so like relatable or whatever the case may be. You have to work purposely. It's not an accident to stay grounded and maintain your integrity and your accessibility while still having boundaries. Heavy is the head. Y'all hear me say it all the time. People think like, oh, I want this position. Do you know how much work it takes to balance that with yourself, with your constituents, with your friends, with your family, with whomever you're working with, for whatever your work is in this world? It is not an easy thing to do. So be careful before you judge those that you see, and especially my fellow YouTubers. It's not an easy thing to do. And nobody even knows I'm here. But for those of us that we know, like Mr. Beast and those people with like millions and millions and millions, there's a time where you have to be like, okay, what's real and who's near? And the people, like, I think of Jenna Marbles, who we really related to, even though she took her break and she was really grounded when she took that mental health break, and she's still gone. But when we think of someone like her, the reason we liked her for so long is because she seemed still relatable in many ways. So think about that. If you are coming into a place of leadership or power, how are you still relatable? And how can you not isolate yourself in that, crystalline tower where then anyone can come in and manipulate you energetically? You need to kind of keep your ear to the ground, your feet to the street, and connect with the peeps that helped you get to wherever you wanted to be. So I don't know who that is for, but that's a message for somebody. And so it says the monk Rasputin, we're almost done here, guys, gained power over the Tsar Nicholas and the Tsar Alexander of Russia through tremendous isolation from the people. Alexandra in particular was a foreigner and especially alienated from everyday Russians. Rasputin used his peasant origins to insinuate himself into her good graces, for she desperately wanted to communicate with her subjects. So she wanted to keep her ear to the ground. So once in the court's inner circle, Rasputin made himself indispensable and attained great power. Heading straight for the center, he aimed for one figure in Russia who commanded power, the Tsarina, who dominated her husband, and he found he had no need to isolate her, for her work was already done. Rasputin's strategy can bring you great power. Always search out the people who hold high positions, yet find themselves isolated on the board. They are like apples falling into your lap, easily seduced and able to catapult you into power yourself. Finally, the reason you strike the shepherd is because such an action will dishearten the sheep beyond any rational measure. When Hernando Cortez and Francisco Pizarro led their tiny forces against the Aztec Incan empires, they did not make the mistake of fighting on several fronts, nor were they intimidated by the numbers arrayed against them. They captured the kings, Montezuma and Athampa. Vast empires fell into their hands. With the ledger gone, the center of gravity is gone. There is nothing to revolve around, and everything falls apart. Aim at the leaders, bring them down, and look for the endless opportunities to confuse that will ensue. In some people's life, the leader was you, and you were aimed at. So that's the funny thing about this law of power. We can utilize it, but we can see how we were attacked. So I was a strong, powerful force in that friend's life. And so what Lindsay did wisely, according to this law, was she identified that and she said, how do we get her the fuck out of here? How do I start to create dissension and doubt? Now, there have been other friends, because when you're a powerful person energetically, people will do that. That will happen, okay? From your friends to your therapist to your homies to whomever. I remember I have a friend still to this day. I was just on the phone with her today. And she's recently moved away. And she... people do this even though they don't think that they're trying to do it. She had a new person around her that wanted to be her primary person, and the friend always talked about me and was like, well, Monette's, my person, and I've known her for 17 years and X, Y, and Z. And so that threatened that person. And so the person tried to lodge the attack to isolate me. She said something to her like, well, Monette's not always right. She started to try to do that thing. Now, here's the juxtaposition I offer you. With the other friend, she heard the whispering, poisonous, forked tongue of the snake trying to undermine the role that I did take in that person's life, which was confidant and friend, very Golden Girls. And she did not share it with me. She allowed it to infect her because the misery wanted company. The other friend was a healing balm for me years later, because instead of just letting a hater get in her ear, and a hater, mind you, who's still in her life, but I did not abandon my position because that was not my life and it wasn't what was called for. I knew who I was, and I knew that that person, that friend that I'm speaking of, was much stronger. She brought it to me, not in a gossipy way, not to triangulate me, but to alert me. And not to say like I'm going to stop being friends with her, but to let me understand. I put her in her place and let her know this friend of mine has not missed and has guided me on some of the most important journeys of my life, from conceiving my kid to moving across country to ascension in the workplace. So that was my job with her, and she has been an incredible friend to me. It's my bulldog. You guys have heard me talk about her. And she's been an incredible friend to me. But what she did was she healed that hurt for me, but it was the opposite. So someone was insidiously trying to take my position, and I was not intimidated by this person. I was like, sweetie, she's going to stay friends with you because she's a good human and you serve a purpose in her life that is going to be fulfilled. She was not as toxic as Lindsay, so I didn't need to isolate or remove myself. But what I did do was I understood this is how people will try to do you. This 42nd law of power is used by people against us, and we could use it to be protective against other people or to isolate when we see dangerous people. Now, that person, I will say, has demonstrated toxic behaviors that I had predicted that did come her way. And that's why she found it very important to try to undermine my position with that friend, because she didn't want my insights to come true again and again. And they did. And I have, with my advice, been able to help my bulldog, my friend, navigate how to have a functioning relationship with that person and understand when she was about to do some low vibrational stuff and how to avoid it and how to circumvent it and how to make sure it didn't affect her business. So my friend made a very wise choice to communicate with me. This person's a little threatened by you. I knew what to do with much practice, but she was trying to isolate her. She would love for me not to be her confidant, because then whatever machinations that she was trying, and the way that the relationship is structured is they're intertwined. So it's not, sometimes you don't have a choice to separate. So she couldn't do that. She was going to have to manage it. Sometimes we're at a job, we can't leave. So sometimes you need to understand these strategies. That's why they're so highly applicable. So she couldn't just be like, oh, okay, she hates Monette and she's being weird. My other friend knew that the person was being weird, but she was getting too much supply and payoff, and she did not value my wisdom in the long run. Tonight, this very night, that friend texted me and she said that she was just offered the biggest promotion of her life. And I said, it is long overdue. You have earned it. And she showed me the text thread where all of the highest executives in the country were texting her congratulations. And this is, congratulations, and we're so proud of you, and we knew you would get here. But she's ascended much quicker than many other people. She's the youngest person to ever be assigned this position. She is the first woman to be assigned this position. I'm so bloody proud of her. But I'm going to tell you something. The kindness that she repaid to me is she said back to me, which I was not expecting, I got here in great part because of you, because you advised me this is something that I could do. You advised me that this is a direction I could go. Now, had she listened to the snake in her ear that wanted to banish me, these were not nuggets of wisdom she would know. You see how it went two different ways? So banishment can work on your behalf or against you. That person wanted to isolate her because she wanted to be the greatest source of power and the advisor in her ear. It is human nature to try to clamber and climb a ladder. So I'm not mad. I understand her nature. I also understood the purpose she served. I also scanned her energetically. Those are the perks of having a psychic bestie. And I was like, she's low vibrational to a degree, but she's workable. So I'll help you work it. And she worked it. It was worth it. But I was not offended. People will often be intimidated by your presence, empath, and they will want to get you out of the paint. Now, if you have a stand-up friend that has a backbone, back to that stingray, that knows your worth, they will do what my friend did. She didn't come bring me drama like a kid. It was one time that we had a conversation, and I knew everything I needed to know. I knew she also pushed back in the way that she needed to, which let me know that she valued me, and so I would value her in turn too. But banishment was not something that outside friend could do. With my weaker, addicted, deleterious, and already kind of weirdly jealous friend, that's one thing I can say. There is no jealousy between me and this friend. We both have been ambitious in our own separate areas, career fields, and successful. And we started from the bottom, projects, nothing, both of us. So we have a respect for each other, a mutual respect, because we know what we have done. We sat on beaches and smoked a little something and talked about this 17 years ago, but it was all a dream. We were so broke, we were pulling together gas money in my putt-putt car that had holes in the floor. That part. So we have a respect for the growth that we have done. However, that other person did not have any respect at all. The point is, she allowed the snake in. The snakes can get in, and empath, you may be the target of that again and again. So you need to be strong. When that attack happened from that other person, it didn't end my world because I'd already suffered through many spiritual warfares, many tower moments. You see why those things happen? It's not just to make you feel horrible. It's so that you know how to proceed forward. That friend didn't shake me. I could still see her at a party, at a gala, at a charity event, and I could smile and hold my head high. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not in competition with you because my friend understands my value. So banishment was not going to happen to me, but it doesn't mean people won't try. Okay? So that's what I want you to understand here. We don't want the confusion to ensue. And so the last thing he says here is, if you draw a bow, draw the strongest. If you use an arrow, use the longest. To shoot a rider, first shoot his horse. To catch a gang of bandits, first capture its leader. Just like a country has its border, so the killing of men has its limits. If the enemy's attack can be stopped with a blow to the head, then why have him dead and why have any more dead and wounded than necessary? And that is from a Chinese poet, believe it or not. And the reversal here, I think, is important. Any harm you do to a man should be done in such a way that you do not need to fear revenge, writes Machiavelli. If you act to isolate your enemy, make sure he lacks the means to repay the favor. Okay? If you apply the law, in other words, apply it from a position of superiority, so that you have nothing to fear from his resentment. Andrew Johnson, Abraham Lincoln's successor and U.S. president, saw Ulysses S. Grant as a troublesome member of the government, so he isolated Grant as a prelude to forcing him out. This only enraged the great general, however, who responded by forming a support base in the Republican Party and going on to become the next president. It would have been far wiser to keep a man like Grant in the fold, where he could do less harm harm and make him revengeful. And you may find often that it's better to keep people on your side where you can watch them than to risk creating an angry enemy. Keeping them close, you can secretly whittle away at the support base so that when the time comes to cut them loose, they will fall fast and hard without knowing what hit them. In the second friend, so some parallels here with Donald Trump and Obama as well. Obama made fun of Trump at the Correspondents' Dinner, and that was his folly. That's when his hubris and his ego got to him. He was very popular, very well liked. He thought it was asinine that this man would ever be president. He was wrong. And he made fun of him, and that enraged him, just like it did Ulysses S. Grant. And he was like, oh, you thought I was feeling you? You thought that I couldn't do what you do? I can do it with my eyes closed. Now, so highly debatable to the kind of president Donald Trump was, but that moment was the villain arc creation. Now, Donald Trump was always villain to me energetically. I have goosebumps on the left side of my head. Never leaning into femininity. What I mean by that is like intuition or anything like that. But what I'm going to tell you is this: that was when Donald Trump formed his attack. It was, you can watch the blood drain out of his face and you can watch him think, I will take your place. And so he did. That's the reversal. No matter how good Obama was or how much he offered or how charismatic, he got a little too hoity-toity in that moment. And instead of keeping your enemy closer, because Donald Trump was always his enemy. It's not to say we should have been kissing his ass. Donald Trump was making problems for President Obama from the beginning of his first presidency. So they were not friends. They were not even frenemies. They were enemies. But he got a little beside himself and did not use his law of power, and then watch that man ascend to the rank of president. Now, in the end here, I love this part. You don't attack directly, because when you make them vengeful, they will come after you. And that is very much what happened in the situation with Lindsay. She knew, because my friend couldn't hold water and did not take the wise counsel that I gave her. She knew that I didn't like her or want to be around her. And I didn't say I didn't like her. I just was like, I even counseled her. I even gave that girl a reading. But what I'm going to tell you is this: she was seething. How dare I reject her? So you have to be very careful. In the other friend dynamic, my friend, no, she's my real friend, no quotations needed, didn't go back to the person she was talking to me about and say, Monette's feelings are hurt or whatever. My feelings weren't hurt. And you heard what I said. I haven't even read this passage, but you hear what I said? I could still be at a charity function with her, at a dinner. I could still be at a holiday party, but I could watch her. And there were times in our connection, even though it's not my friendship, where because of their professional interactions and intertwinings and business dealings, that I was counseling that friend about whatever she may or may not be swindling or stealing. Meaning, like, I had to keep an eye on the very person who was like, I wouldn't trust that everything Monette says. But everything I've said has been absolutely right and kept my friend out of the red. Again, sometimes we cannot disconnect from someone who's low vibrational. So you need someone like me in your corner, boo. But that's not something that the other friend understood. So banishment was something that Lindsay was able to do, and it was something that I did too. And it was rectified with the other friend who did not banish, but instead listened and thought, this makes me, in fact, she said it to me. She said, as soon as she said that to me, it instantly put my heckles up. All of the trust that I had built was erased because you have never steered me wrong. And in fact, we have gone through our trenches where she has taken the side or thought someone else. Like, this has happened repeatedly with that friend, specifically where people are like, I wouldn't trust one that further than I could throw her. This is just the plight of the empath psychic energy. And those people ended up with a felony and in jail and like selling arms to Saudis and wild stuff. My point is, I don't miss. And my angels don't miss. But people will see that in me, and they will see your light empath, and they'll try to resist and try to isolate you, because they'll be like, this person can see through me, and it makes me incensed, unnerved, uncomfortable, and terrified. So we definitely figured out our relationship, but it was interesting to me because what she brought to me was the offering of truthfulness. And that energy was something I could work with. And so now me and that friend again see each other and say hello, but I got my eyes on her. And that's something that she will always have to know. She couldn't topple me, because that's the good positive energy I built with that person. But in other cases, people have toppled me and then come back and been like, you were right, or hid in their miserable lives and just hated me because I was right. Either way, Guys, pay attention. Banishment. Take flight. You take flight or they take flight. And I love what it said here in the last part. If you're going to fell an enemy, meaning make them lay down, unalive their energy, not actually, but like spiritual warfare, make the blow so severe so that they can never recover from it. That's why we don't negotiate with terrorists, aka narcissists. And that's why we don't have endless word salad conversations. When you identify that they are treacherous, let them know and let the nations know and end everything that they ever loved. We see that in movies where it's like they killed generations. So maybe that's not something you're actually going to do. No blood will be on your hands, actually, sweet booze. However, energetically, it may be something you have to do. When I dealt with the Lindsay situation, it was a headshot. I knew what I knew. I wasn't wrong. I knew I wasn't going to be wrong, whether it was 5 years or 2 that it took to evolve and unfold and unfurl in the creepy way that tentacles do. And I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong. So I don't want you to misjudge your own intuition about things. You've known all along. And I took the headshot and then I removed myself. And it paid off greatly for me. Very unfortunate for the person I used to know who now lives in abject misery. Maybe, probably minus that Lindsay, who I'm sure turned on her, because that's what infected people do. Anyway, guys, so good sharing energy with you. This was a longer one, but I think there was a lot of good nuggets there on both sides. Both sides. A very political affair here. Yes, the democracy that we reside in, even metaphysically. Come back and join me next time, and we will continue to evolve together, actually.